Hey guys, Mike here, your resident nerd of color and geek of color at your service. In case it wasn't apparent from the two Advils that I just popped into my mouth right now, I have just seen Smurfs. Yeah. So, look, I'm not going to complain. The life of a critic is actually pretty awesome sometimes. You get to go see a bunch of movies. The people that allow you to see these movies, are just the best, honestly. And I'm so grateful for every single opportunity that I get. Having said that, there are times where you are required to see movies that really just don't work for you at all. And look, it's not anyone's fault that this really isn't a movie that, caters to the demographic that I'm a part of, comic book fans, middle-aged comic book fans. This is definitely a movie that's supposed to be for kids, and I get that. And I respect that 100%. I honestly think that this is one of those movies that parents could take really little kids to see, because I think the older ones might not care for this, but I think they can take their really little kids to see this, and their kids are going to love it. At the end of the movie, there was a post-credit scene, and a family was trying to leave, but the kids, when they found out that there was a post-credit scene, ran back into the theater to try and catch it, while mom and dad stayed near the garbage cans to wait for their kids to finish up, because if they were anything like me, they had enough. Unfortunately, something happens when you're an adult and you become cynical, and these sorts of movies just don't do it for you. But I want to make something clear. I love animation. I do. It's one of my favorite mediums to tell stories in. In fact, when I was in college, I wanted to be a Pixar animator. I wanted to actually get into storytelling and animation, because I do think that it's one of those genres where some of the deepest and most interesting and most human stories can be told in a medium that's just beautiful, that you can't necessarily capture 100% and perfectly in live action. Take a look at things like The Wild Robot. Take a look at things like WALL-E. Take a look at things like Up. These are movies that are just as sophisticated as any live action movies, better than a lot of them, actually, that are done in an animated medium that is very much underestimated and written off as a kid's medium, which is absolutely not true. That being said, Smurfs, this animated movie by Paramount Animation, the studio that brought us really phenomenal movies like Mutant Mayhem, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, and Transformers 1, they've invested in a Smurfs movie that really, really is meant to be for a much more juvenile audience. It's definitely not meant to be for Smurfs fans. It's definitely not meant to be for the more sophisticated Wild Robot crowd. This is a movie that you're supposed to take your kids to so that they can laugh at fart jokes and dance to Rihanna music. No shade on anyone that likes that sort of thing. And no shade to anyone that likes this movie. I'm going to be honest, I couldn't stand it, you guys. It was painful for me to watch. There were about a good 60 seconds where I was sitting in the theater and I was immersed in the colorful world that is Smurf Village. They're singing their little Smurf chant, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, this isn't so bad. Maybe I'll be like Paddington, embrace what made, the Smurf brand so iconic, and legendary and timeless. And then immediately after that, Papa Smurf pulls out a turntable and starts DJing R&B music while the rest of the Smurfs get into a line dance and start, crunking, I guess. I don't know if kids use the word crunking these days. I'm probably showing my very old age. But yeah, it was awful, guys. I don't know what they did to Peyos the Smurfs. It just reeks of studio executives getting into a room and asking the question, well, what can we do to make the Smurfs relevant? What do the kids like these days? I know, let's have them do a rap. Let's have them, get into Rihanna music and have them all hip-hop breakdance. And I'm like, what the F am I watching right now? Seriously, guys. It's just, it's pretty horrible sometimes. The attempts to contemporize these timeless classics that were classics for a reason. And you've got movies like Paddington that exist to show you that you don't need to do that to make a heartfelt, sweet movie. But Smurfs is not one of those. Look, that's not to say that the movie doesn't have its merits. I think that it's gorgeously animated. I think that, you know, there's some really nice lessons there about identity and loving yourself, and the power of kindness and community. And I think that these are things that kids really do need to learn about. I like the fact that this movie does tackle some of those messages. And for at least maybe like 2 minutes, the movie goes all multiverse, because I guess that's a trend now, even though it's a dying trend. But it goes all multiverse, and you get to see different forms of animation being utilized for the storytelling, from stop motion to 8-bit to anime. And I actually kind of love that. I was like, I'm digging this. You know, I mean, like, it's too little too late. You know, I've sat through an hour and 10 minutes of this really wretched movie to get to this point. But you know what? This is clever. This is good. I kind of like that one moment. And that's kind of where, the compliments stop. I'm sorry. I mean, this is a movie that's definitely trying to compete with Trolls, you know, a franchise I never really liked to begin with, but I do think is significantly better than this. The story is, I guess Gargamel and his brother are looking for some magic spell book that was hidden in Smurf Village. They inadvertently kidnap Papa Smurf to try and get him to give him the book. He doesn't know where it is. He's never going to give it up. And the rest of the Smurfs have to go and save Papa. You know, Rihanna's voicing Smurfette, and her co-lead is a Smurf named No Name Smurf, and he's called No Name Smurf because he's not really good at anything, and he doesn't really have anything that he's passionate about, unlike anyone else in Smurf Village, apparently. And so, as they go on this journey, Rihanna is trying to instill confidence in No Name and instill faith and try to get him to love himself and to figure out who he is, you know, and those are really good lessons for kids. It's just unfortunate that none of these characters are interesting or fun. They're just really annoying. No Name Smurf is voiced by James Corden, a really toxic, horrible human being, to be quite frank. And then also, you know, Rihanna's great, but I honestly do think she's kind of miscast here. You know, I don't think she really works that great as Smurfette. But to her credit, she does provide a couple of, like, okay songs to the soundtrack. And I think Rihanna fans, they're definitely going to love that because, you know, it's new Rihanna music, and who doesn't love how Rihanna sings? I really do like her voice as a singer and as a songwriter. Given that, though, you know, the star power of Rihanna just wasn't enough for me. Certainly the star power of James Corden wasn't going to sell me. And everyone else, you know, just kind of, you know, Jolo Mariduana is in this movie. I loved him in Blue Beetle and Cobra Kai. He has maybe like 5 lines as Brainy Smurf. I don't even know, you know, credit where credit's due. He's promoting this movie, but he's really not even in it. You know, I just didn't love the story. I thought it was a really simplistic story. And the way that it carries out that story, it's incredibly boring. You know, you'd think that it should be very simple to convey, but it gets very convoluted because they start talking about Papa Smurf's backstory and, you know, rivalries with other Smurf leaders that he's kind of brothers with, I guess. One of them's named Ron. The other one is, I forgot Nick Offerman's Smurf's name. But honestly speaking, you know, a lot of it's just, they get into a whole scene where every other word that they use is Smurf, and I suppose it's supposed to be a joke. But let me tell you this. In like an hour and 30-minute movie, my audience wasn't laughing. Even the kids weren't really laughing. This was a pretty dead silent audience, with a fair amount of people. You know, the capacity of the theater was actually fairly filled. But if no one's laughing, if no one's reacting, then what does that tell you? It tells you that this isn't a funny movie. It tells you that this isn't an interesting movie. And frankly, I was just shuffling my seat, counting down the minutes for this to end because I was so bored. I was so bored for most of this until that little spark of creativity where they're going through the different mediums actually happens. I was bored. And look, again, I'm not the demographic for this. I'm not a 6-year-old little girl or boy who wants Happy Meal toys of the Smurfs. I get that, but I do think that there's a world where you can take a really good animated movie or, a really good concept, a really good property, make an animated movie out of it and make it appeal to people, who are older, and people who are younger through the means of good storytelling and good characters. There's none of that in Smurfs. This is just not a movie that I think really needs to be seen on the big screen, even though the animation is gorgeous, and I'll give them top marks for that. They start retreading a lot of things from previous Smurf movies too. I think none of the Smurf movies have really ever been good, but at least the ones in the 2010s kind of combined animation and live action pretty seamlessly. They try and do the same thing here, and it doesn't look bad or anything, but again, I just didn't care about anything that was going on screen. You waste the voice talent, you waste, the brilliant animation on a movie that's, I guess some people would call it mid. I'm calling it subpar because honestly, it was a headache to sit through. There wasn't a whole lot of fun to be had. It wasn't funny. It wasn't charming. And I think that that's really what I needed was an element of heart. Everything that was meant to be heartfelt really felt forced, and it's really hard to take the side of a character voiced by James Corden. He's supposed to be the heart of this movie because this character is supposed to discover who he is and love himself and stuff like that, and there's parts of that are kind of touching, but at the end of the day, this is a really obnoxious character. He even starts cursing at the end, which I'm kind of like, I get that that's supposed to be a joke, but also remember who you're aiming this kids movie towards. Younger kids. You didn't need a moment where James Corden, tries to name himself a bunch of expletives, only to have to censor it out. And I guess some people are supposed to think that that's funny. I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was kind of forced and really just dumb. It's a dumb movie. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't have expected anything less, to be honest, or anything more, to be honest. But I mean, you would say the same thing about something like Transformers 1. You could say the same thing about Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. And those movies ended up being fantastic. DreamWorks has had a couple of movies that really looked like they were going to skew younger or didn't look like they were great. Like Puss in Boots' Last Wish, that's a movie that most people underestimate, and it ends up being this really phenomenal, really fantastic, well-written movie that has a lot more to say about it. And I just don't see why you can't do that with Smurfs. I think if you get rid of the turntables and the dad jokes and the fart jokes and really just the random and unnecessary music sequences and unnecessary characters that are meant to sell toys, then maybe you actually could have a good movie on your hands. Unfortunately for Smurfs, you can't get rid of any of those things because that's all this movie is. There's a whole scene where the Smurfs go and visit some random puffball characters in Australia. What is their purpose? They're not... Why are they there? The only thing that actually ever comes out of that is that the Smurfs somehow get a car, to drive to Gargamel's castle or Gargamel's brother's castle. It's a huge waste of a talent like Natasha Lyonne, who, is a phenomenal actress, and you could definitely recognize her voice. But I feel like this was a scene that was created just so that executives can figure out a way to sell plush toy puffballs. To be fair, though, they weren't even cute. They were kind of ugly looking. I really don't get what this movie was. I don't get what this movie was supposed to be. I find myself unfairly getting angry about a movie that is relatively innocent and really not meant for me. But it's just very hard when objectively you're watching a movie, and you just kind of want to, I don't know, you don't want to finish it at all. You really just kind of want to leave, but you're sort of there for it. I don't know. Anyways, don't see this movie, guys. This is at best a 3 out of 10. In my opinion, it's a D. Just go see other animated movies if you're going to take your kids to anything. Go see Elio. Nobody's seeing Elio, and that's such a charming and fantastic and terrific movie that doesn't talk down to its audience or do anything to utilize pop culture to try and, explain why it's appealing. It's a movie that's based solely on heart and character and got some great messages about loneliness, with some stellar animation. That's still in theaters. Go see Dragon. How to Train Your Dragon's wonderful. Go see Lilo and Stitch for the 6th time. There are so many other ways that you could spend your money and take your kids to see something that's actually worth that money than going to see Smurfs. Please try and avoid this movie if you can. And if you can't, then, I don't know, pregame, drink a lot or take an Advil. Just, you have my sympathies, and I certainly hope that you're not subjected to this movie because it's just 90 minutes of ear poison. And honestly, I hate to do this to movies. It makes me sound like a cynical jerk, but it is what it is. Sorry. That being said, I genuinely hope that the next movie that I end up seeing will be a much better one. I like remaining positive on these reviews for you guys, and thank you for bearing with my negativity on this. And if you end up going to see Smurfs and you like it, then mazel tov. Please, I appreciate that. Just know that I won't be anywhere with you in that theater for any sort of a rewatch for the rest of my life. That being said, take care, guys. Enjoy the movies.